The doctor said, "We've done everything." The billionaire went silent. The machines kept failing. That's when a poor black boy made a decision that could either save a life or destroy his own. Would you have done the same? Comment, courage or obedience, which would you choose? Like, if you believe doing the right thing matters more than permission share, this story deserves to be heard. Subscribe, because the impossible is about to happen. The private medical suite looked less like a place where people came to fight death and more like a showroom for what unlimited money could buy. Walls of reinforced glass glowed softly under recessed lighting imported from Italy. The floor beneath the doctor's feet was polished marble, veined with subtle silver lines that reflected the pulse of overhead screens. Machines hummed in synchronized precision. Ventilators, monitors, infusion pumps, each one calibrated perfection, each one worth more than most houses. And yet, for all its luxury, the room felt tight, airless. 18 doctors stood in a semicircle around a single crib. They were the best money could summon. A pediatric cardiologist from Zurich, whose research had redefined neonatal heart surgery. A respiratory specialist flown in overnight from Tokyo. A toxicologist from Johns Hopkins. A geneticist whose name appeared in textbooks. A neurologist knighted by a European monarch. Accents collided softly in the air. British restraint, American confidence, clipped German precision, lyrical French skepticism. White coats, calm voices, controlled movements. Egos trained to never panic. But panic was here anyway. The newborn lay swaddled in imported linen, skin pale under the soft glow of phototherapy lights. Tiny fingers twitched weakly. His chest rose and stalled, then rose again in shallow defiance of the machines doing their best to breathe for him. A monitor let out a sharp, irregular beep. Then another. Oxygen saturation dipped. One of the doctors adjusted a setting, jaw clenched. Another checked a tablet, scrolling through lab results with increasing speed. A third wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced, just briefly, at the others, searching for something no one wanted to say aloud. Money had built this room. Money had flown in these experts. Money had paid for silence, privacy, discretion. But money couldn't stop the numbers on the screen from falling. "We're still losing ground," the respiratory specialist said, carefully neutral. The cardiologist frowned. "That doesn't make sense. His heart is structurally normal." "Blood panels?" someone asked. "Clean. Genetics? No markers. Neurology? No seizure activity." The answers stacked neatly, one after another, like bricks forming a wall. And behind that wall, the truth remained unreachable. In the corner of the room, slightly removed from the circle of white coats, stood Maxwell Rowland. He didn't wear a lab coat. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. The billionaire leaned against the glass wall with one hand braced behind him, the other hanging uselessly at his side. His tailored suit, custom Italian hand-stitched, looked out of place here, too sharp against the sterile environment. Normally, Maxwell Rowland filled rooms without effort. Boardrooms went quiet when he entered. Politicians adjusted their tone. Bankers recalculated numbers in their heads. Control was his natural state. But here, his shoulders were slumped. His eyes were fixed on the crib. They hadn't left it for hours. He had bought companies, crushed competitors, negotiated markets into submission. He had reshaped cities and bent regulations with a phone call. When problems appeared, they moved quickly out of his way. This problem did not. A doctor stepped back from the crib and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Another glanced at the clock mounted discreetly above the monitors, then away again, as if ashamed to acknowledge time was passing. Someone lowered their voice. "We're running out of options." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed heavy in the space between them. Maxwell's fingers tightened against the glass. For the first time since the crisis began, his breathing became uneven. This wasn't a public hospital. There were no crowded hallways, no beeping pagers, no families pacing linoleum floors. This was the private medical wing of one of the wealthiest men alive, a place designed to make problems disappear quietly. But death did not respect privacy. The baby let out a weak sound, not quite a cry, more like a breath that gave up halfway through. A nurse moved instinctively. then froze as three doctors reached for the same controls at once. Wait. No, don't adjust that. Hold on. Hands hovered. Indecision crept in. 18 minds full of knowledge, suddenly bound by uncertainty. Outside the glass wall, just beyond the glow and the authority and the money, stood someone no one had accounted for. His name was Remy Robert. He was 14, thin, his clothes hung a little loose on him, worn clean, but faded from too many washes. His shoes were scuffed, soles softened by years of use. He had been standing there quietly for a long time, back straight, hands folded in front of him the way his grandmother had taught him when he didn't want to be noticed. He wasn't supposed to be there. Children of staff weren't allowed past the service corridor. Visitors needed clearance. Everyone in this wing had a reason to belong. Remy did not. His mother worked nights in the estate's laundry facility, folding linens that cost more than their monthly rent. He sometimes waited for his shift to end, sitting wherever he was told, keeping out of trouble. Tonight, no one had told him where to go yet, so he stood and watched. Through the glass, Remy saw things differently. The doctor's movements didn't impress him. The machines didn't either. He had grown up knowing that shiny things often distracted from what really mattered. His eyes didn't follow the monitors. They followed the room. The way the air seemed heavy, almost sweet. The way the light reflected off certain surfaces more than others. The way the crib was positioned. And then his gaze stopped. Near the baby's bed sat a decorative plant. It was tasteful, elegant, glossy green leaves catching the light just right. White, trumpet-shaped flowers curved outward as if frozen mid-song. A pale ribbon, still tied neatly around the pot, suggested it had arrived recently. A gift. No one had questioned it. Why would they? It wasn't plugged into anything. It didn't beep. It didn't flash red warnings or display numbers that dipped and climbed. It just sat there quietly, looking harmless. Remy's stomach tightened. He leaned closer to the glass without realizing it. He had seen that plant before, not in a place like this, but somewhere else, somewhere far less polished. A memory stirred, his grandmother's voice, low and serious, telling him which plants you never brought into a home, especially where children slept, which leaves you admired from a distance, which flowers were beautiful in a way that had danger. Inside the suite, a doctor shook his head slowly. I don't understand, he said. We've eliminated everything. The toxicologist exhaled. There's nothing left to test. Another beep, lower this time. Maxwell Rowland closed his eyes. Outside the glass, Remy's attention never wavered from the plant. He wasn't looking at the baby. He was looking at what was near the baby, something no one else was watching. And in that moment, standing unseen, uninvited, unnoticed, Remy understood something that made his chest feel tight. The room was full of power, but it was blind. Remy's eyes locked onto the plant, and he knew it didn't belong there. Do you believe money can solve everything? Comment yes or no. Subscribe. This story is just opening its eyes. Remy Robert had learned early how to disappear without leaving. It wasn't a trick you practiced once. It was something you perfected over years, standing still when rooms filled with louder people, lowering your eyes when authority passed by, making yourself small so no one felt inconvenienced by your presence. His mother worked a night shift in the Rowland Estate's laundry wing, a place that never slept because wealth never stopped needing to be cleaned, pressed, folded, and returned to perfection. By the time most of the city was quiet, the machines there roared to life. Industrial washers churning through silk sheets and monogrammed towels, steam rising like breath from tired metal. Remy often waited for her, not because he was told to, but because there was nowhere else to go. Their apartment sat on the edge of the service road, close enough to the estate to feel its shadow, far enough to never feel invited. When his mother's shift ran late, he came with her and waited where he could. He stayed out of sight, out of trouble, out of the way. That was how he had ended up behind the glass. From where he stood, the private medical suite looked like a world sealed off from his own. The glass wall wasn't just transparent. It was symbolic. Inside, money, authority, voices that carried weight. Outside, silence, waiting, people whose names were never asked. Remy pressed his palm lightly against the cool surface, not enough to leave a mark. Inside the room, the doctors moved with urgency now, but still within the boundaries of training and protocol. They spoke in controlled tones, careful not to panic, careful not to sound unsure. Remy didn't understand most of the medical language, but he understood tension. He understood when adults were afraid but didn't want to admit it. His eyes didn't follow their hands. They followed patterns. That habit came from his grandmother. She had raised him for most of his childhood, while his mother worked double shifts. His grandmother's house was small, warm, and always smelled like earth after rain. She believed knowledge lived in observation before words. She taught Remy not by lecturing, but by asking him to notice. "What does the room feel like?" she would say. Not look like, feel like. She taught him plants the same way. Not just names, but behaviors. Which leaves curled at night. Which flowers closed when rain was coming. Which roots healed and which killed. Everything alive is speaking, she used to tell him. Most people just don't listen. She had warned him, more than once, about plants that didn't belong indoors. Plants that stole breath. Plants that made the air lie. Standing behind the glass now, Remy felt that same unease creeping up his spine. Inside the suite, the air looked heavy. Not visibly, but wrong. Too still, too sweet. The light bounced off polished surfaces, refracting softly, but something about it felt trapped. The crib was placed near the corner, positioned for privacy, for aesthetics. A perfect photograph waiting to happen. And beside it, the plant. It sat too close. Remy leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes. Glossy leaves, thick stems, white, trumpet-shaped flowers curling outward, elegant and innocent-looking. A ribbon still tied around the pot. Pale blue, the kind you use for celebrations. A gift. That detail mattered. His grandmother had always said dangerous things were rarely ugly. A memory surfaced uninvited. He was 8 years old, sitting on a wooden stool in her backyard. She held his wrist gently as they stood near a flowering bush, her grip firm enough to stop him from reaching out. "Don't touch," she had said, voice low. "Why?" "It's pretty," he'd replied. She had nodded slowly. "That's how it gets you." She explained how some plants poison the air, not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, quietly, enough to confuse the body, enough to fool people into looking in the wrong place. Remy swallowed. Inside the suite, a nurse adjusted a monitor again. The baby's breathing sounded strained, even through the glass. Remy's gaze flicked from the plant to the crib, then back again. No one else looked. The doctor's attention was consumed by screens and readouts, numbers and charts. They were looking inward, blood, organs, systems. They were trained to search inside the body for answers. Remy was looking at what surrounded the body. That difference felt important. A man in a white coat glanced briefly toward the glass, eyes landing on Remy for half a second before sliding away. Dismissal was automatic. He had seen that look before. Staff kid. Waiting. Irrelevant. Remy didn't mind being unseen. But something about this moment made his chest tighten. Inside, one of the doctors sighed heavily. "We've ruled out infection. There's no congenital explanation. Tox screens are negative." "Tox screens don't test for everything," another replied, frustration breaking through professionalism. Maxwell Rowland stood frozen, his reflection faintly visible in the glass from Remy's side. For a brief second, Remy saw the billionaire's face not as a figure of power, but as a father. That made the dread sharpen. Remy shifted his weight, eyes returning to the plant. It was closer than he liked, too close to where a baby breathed. Another memory surfaced. His grandmother crushing charcoal with a stone, explaining why it mattered to keep it nearby. "Not everything dangerous announces itself," she'd said. "Some things come wrapped in gifts." Remy's hands curled into fists. Inside the suite, a doctor shook his head. "We're out of options." The words landed like a door closing. Remy's heart began to pound, not with fear, but with urgency. He wasn't certain yet, but certainty was forming. Slowly, quietly, the kind that didn't need permission. He leaned closer to the glass, lips parting slightly. No one noticed. The plant's leaves were unblemished. Healthy. Thriving. Too thriving. In a room full of machines fighting to keep a baby alive. Something else was doing far too well. Remy felt a chill crawl up his arms. This wasn't about knowledge versus ignorance. It was about perspective. 18 doctors knew more medicine than he ever would. But they didn't know what his grandmother knew. They hadn't grown up learning survival by paying attention to what others ignored. Remy exhaled slowly. Inside the suite, alarm softened, then spiked again. A nurse murmured something urgent. Maxwell Rowland's shoulders sagged. Remy's eyes never left the plant. His voice came out barely louder than breath. That shouldn't be here. Remy finally understands what the room refuses to see. Have you ever noticed something everyone else ignored? Like if you trust instinct over titles. The room tightened, not physically, but hierarchically. Inside the private medical suite, authority stacked itself in layers. Titles, credentials, accents earned in distant universities. Every voice belonged to someone who had studied longer than most people lived in one place. Every opinion carried the weight of journals, conferences, reputations that opened doors without knocking. And still, nothing worked. A cardiologist from Zurich recalibrated the monitor. Jaw clenched. A pediatric toxicologist from Boston reviewed labs again. Fingers tapping impatiently against a tablet, a neurologist from Tokyo shook his head, muttering something about atypical response curves. They circled the baby like planets around a dying star, each confident in their own orbit, none willing to admit the center was slipping away. "We're missing something," one doctor said quietly. "No," another replied, sharper. "We've ruled out everything relevant." That word, relevant, hung in the air like a verdict. The baby's chest rose unevenly. The machine compensated, then faltered. A soft alarm chimed. Not loud enough to cause panic, just loud enough to remind everyone that time was still passing. Maxwell Rowland stood near the wall, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. He hadn't spoken in minutes. His eyes followed the doctor's movements with the same expression he used in boardrooms when deals went bad, focused, contained, refusing to break. But this was a negotiation. Money had no leverage here. Outside the glass, Remy Roberts shifted closer. Not because anyone invited him, but because something inside him insisted. He pressed his forehead gently against the cool surface, careful not to leave a smudge. From this angle, he could see everything. The crib, the machines, the doctors' faces, and the plant. Still there, still untouched, still ignored. Inside, a debate sparked. It could be a rare metabolic disorder. One doctor suggested, "We've tested for that." What about an airborne allergen? That would have shown respiratory markers. Unless, no, we're not chasing ghosts. A senior physician cut through the noise, voice firm with finality. We're not dealing with the environment. This is internal. Focus. Remy's stomach dropped. That sentence felt dangerous, not because it was wrong, but because it closed doors. He knocked lightly on the glass. The sound was barely audible. No one turned. He knocked again, a little harder. A nurse glanced up, startled, then frowned when she saw him. She leaned toward one of the doctors and whispered something. The doctor's eyes flicked toward the glass. Irritation clear. "Who's that?" he asked. "Staff kid," the nurse replied without hesitation. "Probably waiting for his parent." The doctor waved a hand dismissively. "Get him out of the hallway. This is a restricted area." Remy felt heat crawl up his neck, but he didn't move. He raised his hand slightly, palm open, a universal sign of "please wait." The doctor sighed and stepped closer to the glass, annoyance etched into every line of his face. He didn't open the door. "What is it?" he asked, not unkindly, but not interested. Remy swallowed. "That plant," he said, voice shaking despite his effort. It shouldn't be there." The words left his mouth thin and fragile, like they might break before reaching anyone. Inside the room, the doctor blinked. "What plant?" he asked, already half turned away. "The one by the crib," Remy continued, urgency pushing him forward now. Some plants make the air. That's enough." The doctor cut in, tone firm. "This isn't the time." He turned his back. Just like that, the warning lost oxygen. Another doctor chuckled softly. We got superstition now. No, the first replied. We got distractions. The door remained closed. Remy stood frozen, the echo of his own voice ringing painfully in his ears. He hadn't expected applause. He hadn't expected belief. But he had expected attention. Inside, the debate ended as abruptly as it had begun. A senior physician straightened, exhaled slowly, and said the sentence that would follow Remy for the rest of his life. We've done everything. Silence answered. Not the calm silence of resolution, but the heavy kind that settles when no one knows what to do next. Maxwell Rowland's shoulders sagged. The machines continued their work, indifferent to human surrender. Outside the glass, Remy's heart hammered against his ribs. Everything? He thought. They hadn't moved the plant. They hadn't questioned the gift. They hadn't considered the heir. They had done everything they knew how to do. That realization hit him harder than fear. This wasn't cruelty. It was blindness. Institutional blindness. The kind that didn't come from malice, but from certainty. From training that taught people where to look so thoroughly that they forgot how to look elsewhere. Remy's hands trembled. He glanced down the hallway. 2 security guards stood near the elevator, arms crossed, scanning their surroundings with bored vigilance. Cameras dotted the ceiling, blinking quietly. This wasn't a place where mistakes were forgiven. This was a place where lines were enforced. Remy thought of his mother, folding linen late into the night, of his grandmother's rough hands grinding charcoal, saying, "Carry this. One day, someone won't listen." He looked back at the baby. The chest rose, fell, rose again, slower. The plant's leaves stirred slightly as air circulated. Something inside Remy snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. If he stayed silent, nothing would change. If he stayed invisible, a baby would die. The weight of that knowledge settled onto his shoulders, heavier than any punishment he could imagine. Inside the suite, one doctor placed a hand gently on Maxwell Rowland's arm. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low and professional. Maxwell nodded once, jaw clenched. That was it. The end. Outside the glass, Remy straightened. He no longer felt small. He felt clear. This wasn't about being right. It was about being responsible. He stepped away from the glass, not retreating, but preparing. The hallway felt suddenly narrow. Every sound amplified. The hum of ventilation, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights, the distant echo of footsteps. Remy reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against something familiar. Crude, wrapped in paper, heavy for its size. Activated charcoal. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind, not gentle now, but firm. When people with power stop listening, you don't ask louder. You act. Remy took a slow breath. He looked back at the door to the suite. They had done everything. So now, he would do the unthinkable. Remy understand that silence isn't neutral, it's lethal. Should expertise ever silence intuition? Comment below. Share this. Someone needs to hear it. The memory didn't arrive gently. It hit Remy all at once, sharp, clear, unavoidable. Years ago, long before marble floors and glass walls, before security cameras and whispered authority, his grandmother had crouched beside a clay pot behind their small house. The sun had been low, staining the sky orange, her shadow long across the dirt. "Don't touch that," she had said quickly. Remy, younger then, had frozen with his hand inches from the glossy leaves. "Why?" he asked. His grandmother's face had tightened, not in fear, but in respect. "Because some plants don't hurt you by cutting or biting," she said. "They hurt you by breathing." She told him the name then, not the scientific one. The real one, the one carried through stories instead of textbooks. A name that meant silent taker. A plant beautiful enough to be welcomed into homes, dangerous enough to empty them of laughter if no one knew better. She had explained how the air around it could turn traitor, how small lungs suffered first, how babies were the most vulnerable, not because they were weak, but because they trusted the world completely. As the memory sharpened, Remy's eyes locked back onto the present, the plant by the crib, glossy leaves, white, trumpet-shaped flowers, a decorative ribbon tied around the pot, like a lie dress for celebration. It wasn't just familiar, it was exact. Inside the suite, The doctors were still searching inside the baby. Blood panels, oxygen ratios, neurological possibilities, genetic anomalies. Every explanation lived beneath skin and bone. None of them were looking beside the child. Remy's breathing grew shallow. The symptoms matched too perfectly now that he allowed himself to see it. The uneven breathing, the bluish tint that came and went, the confusion in the data, the way nothing added up. This wasn't a disease. It was exposure. Slow, continuous, invisible. The room itself was poisoning the child. Inside, a doctor adjusted a ventilator setting again. "That should stabilize him," she said, hopeful but unsure. The machine hummed. For a moment, just a moment, the baby's vitals steadied. Then the numbers dipped again. A sharper alarm sounded. Not panic yet, but warning. Maxwell Rowland stiffened. "What's happening now?" he demanded, stepping forward. "We're compensating," another doctor replied quickly. "Sometimes the body." The alarm cut him off, louder this time. Outside the glass, Remy's heart slammed against his ribs. "It's getting worse." The plant stood unmoved, unquestioned, deadly. Remy scanned the hallway again. Security hadn't moved, but now they were watching him. Not closely, not suspiciously, just enough. The cameras blinked. Rules pressed in from every side. He knew what breaking them meant. In this place, crossing a line wasn't a mistake. It was a threat. To order, to hierarchy, to the comfort people who believed they were untouchable. If Remy was wrong, he didn't finish the thought. If he was wrong, he'd be dragged away, blamed, maybe arrested. His mother would lose her job. Their room on the estate would vanish overnight. He'd become another story told quietly to warn other kids to stay invisible. If he was right, he might still lose everything. But a baby would live. Inside the suite, the doctors moved faster now. A pediatric specialist leaned over crib, voice tight, heart rates dropping again. "How is that possible?" someone snapped. "We just adjusted." "We're chasing shadows," another muttered. "This doesn't make sense." Remy felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was the moment, the one his grandmother had prepared him for without ever naming it. The moment when knowledge without permission became dangerous and necessary. He stepped forward, raising his voice louder this time. "That plant is poisoning the air," he said. The words echoed sharper than before, cutting through the tension like glass. Several heads turned. A nurse frowned. A doctor stared at him in disbelief. "What did you say?" the senior physician asked, irritation flaring again. "That plant," Remy repeated, pointing now. "It releases toxins, especially in closed rooms. Babies." "That's enough," the doctor snapped. "Security." The word security landed like a door slamming shut. One of the guards shifted, attention finally fixed. Remy's pulse roared in his ears. Inside the suite, the baby let out a weak cry, thin, strained, terrifying. The monitor screamed. Not a warning now. An emergency. Numbers plummeted. "Vitals are crashing," someone shouted. "Get ready to intubate." Why isn't he responding? Move, move. Chaos erupted, controlled but desperate. Maxwell Rowland surged forward, panic breaking through his composure. "Do something," he shouted. "Do something." Outside the glass, Remy didn't wait anymore. Fear didn't leave him, but it stopped leading. He moved, not running, not hesitating, walking straight toward the door. The guard stepped into his path. "Hey, you can't be here." Remy looked up at him, not defiant, not pleading, certain. "If I don't go in there," Remy said, voice steady despite the storm inside him, "that baby is going to die." The guard blinked, thrown off by the calm. Inside the suite, alarms wailed. A doctor shouted, "We're losing him." That sentence, the same one whispered earlier, now screamed its way into the hallway. Time collapsed. Remy stepped past the guard. Hands reached for him. Voices shouted. But the door was already opening. The baby's vitals dropped sharply, seconds from the point of no return. Would you break the rules to save a life? Subscribe, because the line is about to be crossed. The door stood between Remy and the truth. Thick, reinforced, silent in a way that suggested authority didn't expect to be questioned. Behind it, alarm screamed. Inside it, power scrambled. Around it, rules waited to punish whoever crossed first. Remy stopped just short of the threshold. For the first time since noticing the plant, fear caught up to him. Not the loud kind, the calculating kind. If he stepped through that door, there would be no rewinding the moment. He saw the consequences clearly, each one sharp enough to hurt. Arrest at a boy in a billionaire's private medical suite. Touching a newborn without permission. The headlines wouldn't ask why. They would only ask who let him in. Violence. Security trained to neutralize threats, not weigh moral arguments. One wrong move, one raised voice, and he'd be on the floor before he could explain anything. Eviction. His mother's job wasn't protected by contracts or kindness. One accusation, and their place on the state would vanish. No warnings, no appeals, disbelief. Even if he spoke, even if he acted, the doctors would still dismiss him as reckless. Lucky. Wrong, but coincidentally correct. The cameras blinked red. They were watching. Every angle, every step. Inside the room, the baby cried again, weak, strained, like the sound was being pulled out of him rather than offered. The monitors answered with sharp beeps. Too sharp, too fast. Remy felt his chest tighten. He remembered another sound. Years ago, late at night, rain leaking through the roof of their small room. His grandmother coughing softly as she sat on the edge of the bed, grinding something dark between her palms. "Why do you always carry that?" he had asked her once, pointing to the small packet she tucked into her pocket before leaving the house. She smiled faintly. "Because help doesn't always come dressed like doctors," she said. "Sometimes it comes dressed like preparedness." She had poured the black powder into a folded piece of paper and pressed it into his hand. "Charcoal," she explained. "It binds poison, pulls it out when nothing else can." "Will I ever need it?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, longer than necessary. "You might," she said. "And when you do, no one will believe you should have it." The memory burned now. Remy's hand slid into his pocket. The packet was still there, worn, creased, unremarkable, unimpressive. A laugh escaped him, quiet, disbelieving. 18 doctors. Machines worth millions. A room designed to intimidate illness into submission. And the answer was something his grandmother had taught him to carry just in case. Inside the suite, a doctor shouted, "Oxygen's not stabilizing." "We're running out of time." Another voice said, sharp with panic now. Maxwell Rowland's composure shattered completely. "Save him," he said hoarsely. Not commanding. Begging. "Please." The word please hung in the air like a crack in glass. Remy took a step forward. A guard reached out instinctively. "Kid, don't." Remy didn't push him, didn't shout. He simply looked at him. Not as a boy, as someone who knew. "If I'm wrong," Remy said quietly, "you can do whatever you want of me." The guard hesitated. "If I'm right," Remy continued, eyes never leaving the door, "you'll never forgive yourself for stopping me." The alarms inside climbed in pitch. The baby's cry faded into a thin, frightening silence. That sound, the absence of sound, made the decision for him. Remy stepped past the guard. Hands grabbed his arm. Someone shouted his name, or maybe just, "Hey!" The cameras caught everything. Remy pushed the door open. The room exploded. Who let him in here? Get him out now. Security. White coats turned in unison, outrage snapping over panic. Remy didn't stop. He moved straight toward the crib. The plant was closer than he remembered. Too close. The leaves trembled slightly as the ventilator pushed air through the room. Remy knocked the pot over with his foot. Soil spilled across the floor, dark, undeniable. Gasps cut through chaos. A doctor froze mid-step, staring at the plant like he was seeing it for the first time. What the hell? Remy didn't wait for permission. He reached the crib. The baby's skin was pale now, lips tinged blue, chest rising unevenly. Every instinct in Remy screamed now. He tore open the charcoal packet with his teeth, spilling the black powder into his palm. "Stop him," someone yelled. Hands grabbed his shoulders. Remy spoke fast, clear, desperate. "It's the plant," he said. "Poison in the air. This will bind it. Please." A guard hesitated again. So did one doctor. Just long enough. Remy acted. He administered the charcoal carefully, gently, exactly as his grandmother had shown him. Small amounts, controlled, focused. The room held its breath. Seconds passed. Then the baby coughed. A weak sound, but real. The monitors flickered. One number stabilized. Then another. "Wait," a nurse whispered. "Look at the oxygen." The alarm softened. Not stopped, but changed. The room went silent. 18 experts stared at the screens, disbelief rippling across their faces. The baby's breathing steadied, still fragile but present. Remy stepped back slowly, hands shaking now that the moment had passed. Security finally pulled him away, but no one shouted. No one spoke. Maxwell Rowland stared at his child, alive, and then at Remy. The baby's vitals stabilize, but security closes in, and no one knows whether Remy will be hailed as a hero or taken away in cuffs. This is the moment. Would you act? Like if courage matters more than permission. The moment Remy crossed the invisible line between observer and participant, the room erupted, not all at once. First in disbelief, then in panic. Who is that? Get him away from the crib. Security now. White coats moved in conflicting directions. Some lunged forward. Others froze, instinctively sensing that something irreversible had just begun. Remy felt hands brush his shoulders, fingers grazing his shirt, but no one had a clean hold on him yet. The chaos worked in his favor, authority breaking into fragments instead of acting as one. He reached the crib. The baby's chest fluttered like it was trying to remember how to breathe. Too slow, too shallow. Remy didn't think anymore. Thinking was what had delayed everyone else. He lifted the baby carefully, instinct guiding his hands. The child felt lighter than he should have, fragile in a way that terrified Remy more than any shouting voice behind him. A doctor screamed, "Put him down!" Another yelled, "He's contaminating the field." Security surged forward. At the same time, Remy kicked the decorative plant away from the crib. The ceramic pot shattered against the marble floor. Soil exploded outward, dark, wet, undeniable. Gasps rippled across the room. For the first time since this nightmare began, a doctor stopped moving. He stared at the fallen plant, then at the leaves, then at the ribbon still tangled in the soil. "No," the doctor murmured, not angry, not commanding, realizing. "What?" someone snapped. "Focus." "That plant," the doctor said slowly. "It shouldn't have been here." The words didn't stop the guards, but they slowed them just enough. Remy used the moment. He reached into his pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out the small packet. Creased, unimpressive, completely out of place in a room that cost more per minute than his mother earned a year. "What is that?" a nurse demanded. Remy's voice cracked, but didn't break. "Charcoal," he said. "Activated. It binds poison." Laughter burst out from somewhere behind him, sharp, hysterical. "You expect us to let a kid experiment on a billionaire's baby?" a doctor shouted. Another voice cut through, quiet, shaken. "Wait." The doctor who had frozen earlier stepped closer, eyes fixed on the spilled soil. "Digitalis," he whispered. Or, "No," devil's trumpet. The room shifted, not convinced, but unsettled. Remy didn't wait for permission that would never come. He acted. He administered the charcoal gently, carefully. No rush now, no panic, just precision guided by memory and instinct. Guards finally reached him, hands clamped down on his arms. "Enough," one growled. Remy didn't resist. He had already crossed the line that mattered. The baby coughed. It was faint, but it was real. Every voice in the room cut off at once. The monitors flickered. A single tone changed. Not louder. Different. A nurse leaned toward the screen. "Hold on, that number just stabilized." Another monitor followed. Then another. Oxygen levels rose, not dramatically, not miraculously, but consistently. The baby's breathing smooth. The cries stopped, not because he was weaker, because he was calmer. The room held its breath. 18 doctors, men and women who had stood unshaken in operating rooms, disaster zones, war hospitals, stared at the screens like children watching something sacred. No one moved. No one spoke. The guards loosened their grip without realizing it. The only sound left was a quiet, steady rhythm of a heartbeat that had nearly disappeared minutes earlier. Maxwell Rowland stepped forward, slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. He looked at the monitors, then at his child, alive, then at the boy standing in the center of the room. Shirt rumpled, hands trembling, charcoal smudged across his fingers like ink. Security looked to Maxwell for orders. He didn't give any. One doctor finally broke the silence. "How did you know?" he asked Remy, not accusing. Asking. Remy swallowed. "My grandmother," he said simply. "She told me what never belongs near babies." No one laughed. No one dismissed him. The doctor who had recognized the plant crouched near the spilled soil, lifting a leaf carefully. "God," he breathed. "This explains everything." The words hung in the air like a verdict, not just of relief, of failure. Remy felt the weight of it then, not pride, not triumph, but exhaustion, the kind that comes when fear finally lets go. His knees threatened to give out. A nurse guided him to a chair without asking permission. Security stepped back. Cameras, still rolling, captured everything. No one stopped them now, because the impossible had already happened. The room falls silent as the baby stabilizes, but security radios crackle. Investigators are already being called. And Remy doesn't know whether he's about to be thanked or taken away. Did he just save the baby or doom himself? Subscribe. The impossible is seconds away. No one announced it. No one dared to. The change arrived quietly, like a breath returning to a room that had forgotten what air felt like. The oxygen monitor steadied first. Not dramatically. Not with a triumphant spike. Just steady. A thin green line that stopped dipping. A nurse leaned closer, brow furrowing. She tapped the screen once, then again, as if expecting it to argue with her. "It's holding," she whispered. The heart monitor followed. The frantic, uneven rhythm softened into something recognizable, something human. The sound filled the room, not loud, not celebratory, but constant. A heartbeat that wasn't surrendering anymore. Someone let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Then another. Then the entire room seemed to exhale at once. 18 doctors stood frozen. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because for the first time in hours, there was nothing to do. The baby lay quietly in the crib, chest rising and falling in a slow, natural rhythm. His skin, once tinged with a frightening shade of blue, warmed gradually, color returning like sunrise after a long night. A nurse reached out instinctively, then stopped herself, eyes darting toward the monitors. Still stable. Still improving. Her hand trembled. "I don't understand," one doctor murmured, voice hollow. "We ran every test." Another answered without looking away from the screen. "We ran every test we knew to run." The implication landed hard. Remy sat in the chair near the wall, shoulders slumped, adrenaline draining from his body all at once. His hands shook now, not with fear, but with release, the kind that comes when your body realizes it's allowed to feel again. He hadn't expected this moment. Not really. He had imagined chaos, punishment, being dragged away before knowing if it worked. He hadn't imagined silence. A thick, reverent quiet filled the room, broken only by the softened machines and the gentle rhythm of life continuing. Maxwell Rowland stood at the foot of the crib. The billionaire who had built empires with decisive movements now couldn't move at all. He stared at his child. Alive. Not saved yet. Not we'll see. Alive. His knees weakened. A doctor reached out instinctively, steadying him by the elbow. Maxwell didn't notice. His eyes burned, vision blurring as something unfamiliar rose in his chest. Something heavier than fear, deeper than relief. Gratitude. Not abstract. Not intellectual. Personal. Raw. The head physician finally broke the silence. clearing his throat like he was afraid sound itself might undo the moment. "We need to confirm toxicity levels," he said carefully. But there's no denying the response. Another doctor nodded slowly. "The charcoal would bind the compounds. It explains the reversal." A third whispered, almost to himself, "It explains everything." No one looked at Remy. Not yet. They looked at the fallen plant. Security had quietly cordoned off the area. The shattered ceramic pot now lying like a confession on the floor. Soil was being carefully collected, photographed, bagged. Evidence, not of a miracle, of a mistake, of something far worse. A nurse turned toward Remy, then really looked at him for the first time, not as a distraction, not as a problem, as the reason the baby was breathing. Her eyes filled. "Thank you," she said simply. Remy didn't know how to respond. He nodded once, small, unsure. Across the room, the doctor who had first recognized the plant straightened slowly. "We owe you an apology," he said, voice steady but thick. "All of us." A few heads bowed, not dramatically, but sincerely. Maxwell Rowland turned. His gaze landed on Remy and held. The room waited. Security stilled. Cameras, still rolling, captured everything. Maxwell crossed the space between them. Each step measured. Deliberate. He stopped in front of the boy who had done what his wealth, his influence, his army of experts could not. And then he knelt. Gasps rippled through the room. Phones tilted upward to capture the moment no one would believe without proof. Maxwell didn't care. "I didn't see you," he said, voice breaking without apology. "And you saved my son." The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. They were truth. Remy's throat tightened. He shook his head. I remembered something." Maxwell's eyes filled completely now. That was enough. Behind them, a security officer's radio crackled. "Perimeter team in place." A voice said, "Investigators en route." The words cut through the reverence like a blade, reality reasserting itself. The baby was alive, but the questions were just beginning. The doctor who had been collecting soil looked up. "This plant wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "It had to be placed intentionally." A murmur swept through the room. Maxwell stiffened. "What do you mean?" he asked. The doctor met his gaze. "Someone wanted this to look like unexplained failure." Silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, dangerous. Remy felt it shift, the air tightening again, but differently now. Not despair. Exposure. Security repositioned, alert but uncertain. Their job had changed without anyone giving an order. They weren't guarding a dying child anymore. They were guarding the truth. A senior nurse checked the monitors again, voice trembling with restrained awe. "He's stable," she said. Fully stable. The room let out a collective breath. This one louder, freer. Somewhere, someone laughed softly in disbelief. Others cried openly. 18 doctors stood in quiet humility, faces stripped of certainty, left with something rarer. Perspective. Remy leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally winning. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. He didn't know what came next. Praise. Punishment. Questions. Consequences. But for the first time since he'd noticed the plant, one thing was certain. The baby would live. Footsteps echoed in the hallway as security cleared a path. Investigators arriving, eyes sharp, questions ready. The miracle had happened, but the reckoning was walking in. Type, "Wow, if you felt that moment, share this." Hope spreads fast. The miracle had barely settled before the machinery of truth began to move. Not the humming machines by the crib. Those were steady now, faithful in their rhythm. But the invisible systems that woke up when something didn't add up. Security sealed the medical wing within minutes. Not loudly, not with panic, with precision. 2 guards stood at the door. Another pair checked every exit. Phones were collected from staff, not confiscated, just paused. The cameras that had already captured the moment were logged, time-stamped, protected. Evidence mattered now. The lead physician removed his gloves slowly, eyes never leaving the fallen plant. "It wasn't decorative," he said. "It was deliberate." A forensic specialist crouched beside the shattered ceramic pot, photographing every angle. Soil samples were sealed. Leaf fragments carefully labeled. This species isn't sold locally, she added, and it's not something you gift accidentally. Maxwell Rowland stood back, his child breathing peacefully behind him, and felt the temperature of the room drop. Who sent it? He asked. The question landed heavier than anyone expected, because everyone already knew the answer would hurt. The estate's internal records were accessed within minutes. Gift logs, delivery manifests, security footage from the previous week. A timeline assembled itself with ruthless efficiency. The ribbon, white silk, imported, monogrammed. One of the nurses remembered it clearly. It came with a handwritten note, she said quietly. Congratulations on the heir. The handwriting was pulled from the archive, matched. A name appeared on the screen, large, undeniable. Elliot Graves, Maxwell's longtime business partner, friend, the man who had toasted the baby's birth with champagne that cost more than most homes. A low murmur spread through the room. No, Maxwell said instinctively. That's not possible. But the system didn't care about disbelief. It cared about patterns. Financial analysts, patched in remotely, began cross-referencing data. Quiet clicks echoed as numbers aligned. Insurance policies, succession clauses, deferred control agreements. One analyst swallowed hard before speaking. If the child hadn't survived, Control 3 Trust would have shifted within 90 days. Another added, including the one tied to international shipping rights. The implication was brutal. This wasn't malice born of impulse. It was strategy. The room felt smaller. Remy sat quietly near the wall, listening as pieces fell into place like dominoes. He hadn't thought about motives. He hadn't needed to. But now, hearing it spoken aloud, he felt something cold slide down his spine. Someone had smiled while trying to kill a baby, wrapped it in celebration. Security received a silent nod from Maxwell. Bring him in, he said. No, the head of security corrected gently. We already have. The door opened. Elliot Graves stood framed in the doorway, confusion still on his face. Confusion that hadn't yet learned it was too late. He wore a tailored suit, flawless. His smile faltered as he took in the room. The overturned plant, the sealed evidence bags, the unmoving line of security. His eyes found Maxwell. Is everything all right? He asked. No one answered. A detective stepped forward, badge catching the light. Mr. Graves, you're being detained for questioning in connection with attempted homicide. The word echoed. Homicide. Elliot laughed once. Sharp, disbelieving. This is absurd. The detective didn't flinch. We have delivery records, financial motive, and toxicology evidence. You can explain it downtown. Elliot's gaze darted, to the crib, to the doctors, to the boy he had never noticed. And for the first time, his mask cracked. This was supposed to look natural, he whispered. The room went still. The words hung there, raw, unfiltered, a confession disguised as shock. Maxwell closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was no anger left, only clarity. Get him out, he said quietly. Elliot was escorted away, protest dissolving into the shuffle of consequences. Justice didn't raise its voice. It simply removed him. A nurse locked the evidence case. Charges will be filed tonight, she said. The detective nodded. There's enough here to bury him. The baby stirred, letting out a soft sound, alive, unaware of how close the world had come to stealing him. The room shifted again, from exposure to reckoning. Maxwell turned slowly. His eyes found Remy, the boy who had seen what no one else had, who had acted when institutions hesitated, who had saved a life without asking what it would cost him. Maxwell took a step toward him, then another. Remy straightened instinctively, unsure what this moment required of him. The billionaire stopped an arm's length away. The room held its breath. Maxwell Rowland opened his mouth to speak to Remy, for the first time since the truth was revealed. Should betrayal from the top be punished harder? Like if you believe truth should always come out. The room had seen everything money could buy. Now it was about to witness something money could not. Maxwell Rowland stood in the center of the private medical suite. No longer the titan of boardrooms and acquisitions, but a father whose child had just been pulled back from the edge of death by a boy the world had taught him not to see. The doctors were still there, 18 of them, men and women whose names filled journals, whose opinions shaped policy, whose hands had held power over life and death for decades. They stood in a loose semicircle now, not as authorities, but as witnesses. Security remained at the doors. Cameras were still rolling. Nothing about this moment was private. Maxwell took one step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of Remy Robert. The boy did not move. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply stood there, thin shoulders squared, hands at his sides, eyes steady but uncertain. He had already crossed the line fear drew. Whatever happened next, he would meet it standing. Maxwell looked at him for a long moment, not as a billionaire, not as an employer, but as a man confronting the truth of himself. Then, slowly, deliberately, Maxwell Rowland lowered himself. One knee touched the polished floor. Then the other. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the machines, but everyone heard it. A billionaire knelt. Gasps rippled through the room. One doctor instinctively stepped forward, then stopped, unsure why his body had moved at all. Another swallowed hard, eyes burning with something uncomfortably close to shame. Maxwell did not look at them. He looked up at Remy. "I failed you," he said. The words were clear, unqualified, unprotected. "I failed to see you. I failed to hear you. And because of that, my child almost died." No excuses followed. No explanations. No softened language. The room leaned inward. "I built a world where credentials matter more than truth," Maxwell continued. "Where wealth spoke louder than wisdom. Where a boy like you could stand 10 feet away from disaster and be invisible." Remy's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't wanted anything. "I'm sorry," Maxwell said. Not performative. Not rehearsed. A real apology. Spoken by a man who knew it would not erase what had happened. Silence pressed down, heavy and sacred. One of the doctors lowered her head. Another removed his glasses, blinking rapidly. The lead physician, the one who had earlier said we've done everything, felt the sentence collapse inside him. For the first time in his career, he understood that everything did not always include humility. Maxwell turned his head slightly, still kneeling. "This room was full of the best minds money could gather," he said. "And still, it took someone without a title to save my son." He looked back at Remy. "You acted when power froze." The words landed like a verdict. Not condemnation, but truth. Remy finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I just didn't want the baby to die. That was all. No speech. No claim. Just intention." Something inside the room broke open. A doctor stepped forward, then stopped, then spoke, voice rough. "We didn't listen," she said. "We should have." Another nodded. "We were trained to look inward, labs, scans, charts. We forgot the room exists too." One by one, the certainty that filled the suite earlier drained away, replaced by something far more dangerous to ego and far more necessary to progress. Perspective. Maxwell rose slowly to his feet. The act of kneeling had changed him, not symbolically. Structurally, he turned to the doctors now. "This doesn't end with gratitude," he said. "It ends with change." They waited. "I built this wing to represent excellence," Maxwell continued. "But excellence without listening is just arrogance in a tailored suit." No one argued. "I want protocols rewritten," he said. "Environmental assessments made standard, traditional knowledge reviewed, not dismissed. And I want a seat at the table reserved for voices that don't look like ours." A pause. "This is not charity," Maxwell added. "It's survival." Remy felt something shift beneath his feet. Not the floor, but the future. Maxwell faced him again. "You saved my son," he said. "But more than that, you exposed a blind spot that nearly cost everything." Remy nodded once. He didn't know how to accept praise. He had grown up learning to accept consequences. Maxwell's voice softened. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But if you choose to stay, if you choose to learn, this world will make space for you. Not as a favor, as a correction." The machines continued their steady rhythm behind them. Life uninterrupted. Security relaxed by a fraction. The doctors began to disperse. Quieter now, reflective. Some avoided Remy's gaze. Not out of disdain, but out of reckoning. Others nodded at him. Small acknowledgments, heavy with meaning. The lead physician approached Remy carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding us what medicine is supposed to be." Remy nodded again. Words still felt too small. Maxwell placed a hand briefly over his heart. "This won't end here," he said, not as a threat, but as a promise. Remy looked up at him. For the first time, he believed it, because power had just done the unthinkable. It had knelt. And when power kneels, the world has to rearrange itself. What does real power look like to you? Subscribe. Legacy is about to be written. The arrest came quietly. No sirens. No spectacle. Just a pair of black vehicles pulling to the side gate of the estate before dawn, when even the marble floors were still asleep. The man who had sent the plant, the trusted associate, the smiling guest, the congratulatory gift giver, did not resist. He looked smaller than his reputation, thinner than his confidence. When the cuffs closed around his wrists, he asked only one question. "Is the baby alive?" "Yes," the investigator said. The man closed his eyes, not in relief, in defeat. The truth did not need noise. It only needed daylight. By morning, the estate felt different, not quieter, just honest. Doors that had once been symbolic barriers were now open. Staff moved freely through hallways they had memorized but never owned. Conversations changed tone. People looked up when Remy walked past, not out of curiosity, out of recognition. Maxwell Rowland kept his promise, not with a press conference, with policy. Within weeks, the private medical wing became something new, not just a monument of wealth, but a model for integration. Environmental assessments were written into every protocol. A council was formed. Scientists, physicians, community healers, environmental specialists, voices that had never shared a table now sharing responsibility. The doctors returned home changed. Some wrote papers. Others rewrote careers. One resigned from a board that had dismissed community-based knowledge as unscientific. Another funded a research grant in traditional toxicology. None of them forgot the moment a boy, without credentials, saved a child with courage. And then there was the center. It rose on land that had once been ornamental, and used green space designed to impress from a distance. The new building did not shine like glass or steel. It breathed. Natural light. Open corridors. Gardens where dangerous plants were labeled, not hidden, with stories of what they could heal and what they could harm. On the front wall, carved in simple stone, were the words, "The Ella Robert Community Wellness Center." Remy stood in front of it the day it opened, his hands clenched loosely in his jacket pockets. His grandmother's name looked unreal in stone. She had never owned property, never had a bank account, never stepped foot inside a hospital, unless she had no choice. But she had known things, and now the world was listening. Maxwell spoke that day, briefly. "This center exists because wisdom does not belong to institutions," he said. "It belongs to people. And when we ignore it, we all pay the price." He did not mention money. He did not mention redemption. He mentioned responsibility. Remy did not speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a statement. His future unfolded quietly. A scholarship, yes, but not announced like charity. An education, yes, but not detached from where he came from. He studied biology and environmental health. He spent weekends at the center, cataloging plants with elders who had once been dismissed as superstitious. He learned to translate between worlds, data and memory, labs and lived experience. He did not become famous. He became effective. Sometimes, late in the evenings, he sat with Maxwell in the garden outside the center. The billionaire no longer talked about markets or leverage. He asked questions instead. What would your grandmother say about this? What are we missing? How do we listen better? Remy answered when he could, and when he didn't know, he said so. That, too, was wisdom. The baby, once fading, once blue, grew strong. Laughter replaced monitors. Tiny fingers wrapped around Remy's thumb the first time they met again, months later. Maxwell watched it happen. He understood then that legacy was not what you protected. It was what you corrected. Years passed. The story traveled, not as rumor, not as spectacle, but as reference. In classrooms, in ethics boards, in whisper reminders when someone powerful dismissed someone quiet. Remember the boy. Remember the plant. Remember the cost of not listening. Remy never told the story himself. He lived it, and the world adjusted around him. Because once you see someone, truly see them, you cannot unsee them. And once power kneels the truth, it never stands the same way again. Final reflection. Wisdom ignored is dangerous. Respect denied costs lives. 18 doctors had knowledge point one poor black boy had perspective, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe. Truth only wins when it's shared.